Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Mayor's Community Policy Trust. I am so excited to have Mayor Becky Daggett, Mayor Daggett here, the mayor of Flagstaff, Arizona. How are you?
I'm great today. How are you?
I am absolutely wonderful. I know that we have been planning to have you on the show for a while, and so I'm excited to have this conversation with you, not only because you are the mayor of my beloved city, Flagstaff, Arizona, but also because you're a Flynn Brown Fellow.
Yes, I am. One of the best things I've ever done.
You and I share the fact that we were both mayors of Flagstaff. You're current mayor. I was one-time mayor, and we are both Flynn Brown fellows.
Yeah, it's a great program.
So, Mayor Becky, I want to start off because there might be some people that do not know you. So, I just want to start off our conversation today. What we're going to be talking about statesmanship and what does that look like in public policy and in leadership, especially at the local level. But I wanted to first get to know you a bit. How did you get into politics? Like, were you always the mayor, or how did you decide to run for mayor? What was that like?
Well, I've long been involved in community issues, and I was the executive director of Friends of Flagstaff's Future for about 10 years, and then went on to work for the city in economic development, business retention and expansion specifically, and then went to the Flagstaff Arts and Leadership Academy. Um, I've worked at a number of jobs with the word Flagstaff in the name of the organization, and I never thought that I would run for office. I just always thought I would be more of the behind the scenes kind of policy development person. And after I left the Flagstaff Arts and Leadership Academy and did some consulting work with a couple of other organizations, I thought, I've got all of this experience in the arts, in education, in community planning. And I had been on so many task forces and committees for the city. And I thought maybe I will run for council. So I ran for city council and was vice mayor, and then ran for mayor in 2022.
And so, why did you run for mayor? Why? What was the why behind that?
Um, I felt that I felt that I had some skills that I could bring to the council and to the city that might better serve us in collaborating with each other and collaborating with community partners to get things done. And so I decided to take the chance and run for mayor. And of course, I'm glad that I won. But if I hadn't, my bigger disappointment would have been just that I was unable to serve on council any longer, because I really enjoy it much more than I ever could have imagined enjoying it. So I'm glad things worked out the way they did.
I found that to be very true as well. Serving on council and serving as mayor and really getting into the policy, the weeds, so to speak, right? About how communities can move forward and everybody in the community can thrive. You talked about collaboration, and I think that that is probably a very good point for us to start with in this conversation about statesmanship. Just for the viewers, if you're just tuning in, we use the word statesmanship here on the Mayor's Community Policy Trust as a non-gendered word. We believe that anyone can be a statesman or grow into being a statesman, and we want to talk about what those qualities look like. How do you identify those qualities, and why is it that statesmen are so rare, for lack of a better word? So you talk about collaboration. What does that mean when it comes to public policy and the community?
Um, well, it means bringing different voices to the table. For instance, last week, I convened a group of Flagstaff leaders in education, workforce development, economic development down in Phoenix at the Helios Education Foundation to pour over data about education and workforce development in Coconino County. and just to have a conversation about what success looks like for us as a community moving forward in terms of both education and workforce development. So it's seeking out the people who have a stake in the issue, an interest in the issue, and in this case, a great deal of experience in the issue.
Well, how do you go about making sure that all voices are heard? And is it possible for all voices to be heard in a conversation?
You know, I think it depends on the conversation, and I think it depends on the amount of time that you have. Like, are you needing to make a decision as a city council in a month, or is this a bigger community issue? And so for this that I just mentioned, I had been meeting with people. First, I went to Helios with the Mayor's Roundtable for Education that I'm a member of, and saw what was available to us. And then I just started meeting with people about bringing people together. And there was some interest in that. And so I tried to think in terms of not only those people leading institutions, but also, say, like the Northern Arizona Interfaith Council. I know that they are keenly interested in educational issues, so asking them to join us. So I tried to make it a diverse group, but it's also just one conversation of what I hope will be many. And so I just see it as a first start. But I do think it depends on the amount of time that you have to talk about an issue, and also how big the issue and how big the issue is, and how impactful to the community.
Yeah. And so when we talk about, how impactful are the community or how big the issue is, and trying to make sure that we have, I guess, as many voices at the table that want to be at the table. And I hate to use the metaphor of the table. I say in the room, quite frankly, because not everybody wants to sit at the table. Not everyone's interested at the table. The table might take up too much room, and you actually need that space to bring more people in. But how do you, when we talk about collaboration, there's another word that's called compromise. And it seems like, at least at certain levels and with certain individuals, compromise is a bad word. What do you think about compromise, and how does it relate to statesmanship? Or does it?
I think for the work of a city council or any governing body, it's critical to the deliberations that they have. Like for the city council, there are 7 of us, plus there's the community, plus there's city staff. So what we do involves compromise. Now, when you are advocating for an issue, and you're an important part of the conversation, and the expertise that you've gathered in your advocacy is important to listen to, but it's really just one of many voices and one of many considerations that an elected body has to contend with.
You brought up an interesting word, advocacy, right? And usually we associate advocacy with like activists. And I think that we would all agree that activists are definitely needed in our society. They play a very valuable role. They point out, what's wrong, what needs to be changed, something that we need to look at. Do you think that there's a difference between an advocate and a statesman? And if so, what would be the difference? Maybe we should start with, how do you define statesmanship?
I actually jotted down some notes that I'm trying to look at here. I think so. An activist or an advocate, you can be an activist for many different issues, right? But for the sake of this discussion, let's say you're an advocate for one position, one issue. And as you said, that's really important because it's important for the community to on a continual basis consider what could be better, what could be changed, what's not going right in the community or world. And how I see a statesman is taking that perspective into consideration, but you're also taking the perspective of many others into consideration, including if you say you're about to pass a policy, trying to include those voices of people who would be most impacted by a decision, bringing them into the discussion as well, doing your own research, and talking with your colleagues. So it involves not making snap judgments about an issue and being open to hearing different perspectives. And I've been practicing on not having as strong a reaction to something that I might feel really strongly about, and trying to really stay present and listen when someone is expressing a different point of view. And that really helps me to actually hear what the other person is saying. And that's not to say that activists don't do that as well. You know, I came from an activism background and considered myself a good listener at that time as well. But my issue was my issue, right? And that's what I was advocating for. And now I have to take a much broader view of all issues, and sometimes have to make difficult decisions because I think that they're in the best interest of the community, not necessarily, just what's easiest.
It's interesting how you say that, your issue is your issue. I came from an activist background when I ran for council, and I was very focused on my issue. And my issue is what I cared about. Didn't necessarily care about other issues that might be related or not related. And, once I got on council, I realized that there was so much more than just my issue. And I realized that how my issue tied into other issues. And then I also realized that council looked at a lot of different things: water, police and fire, the libraries, streets, trash pickup, landfill. What do you think about single issue candidates? Candidates that run on one particular issue and that's the only thing they're interested in. And then when they get on council, they're still only interested in that issue. And once that issue is solved, usually it's solved before you get on council. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the key phrase that you said was, even when they get on council, they're only interested in that one issue. Because you can come, like you just described yourself, there could be something that really excites you and makes you want to get involved, and that's fine, right? That's what propels you to run for office. But once you get into that office, I think it's a disservice to the community if you don't show at least similar interest in other issues. Because you're right, there are so many issues, and you're asked to quickly become well versed in stormwater and stormwater drains and stormwater infrastructure and things that you might not necessarily have previously thought were very interesting. But once you're in this role, you see the impact on the community. And so it's really your obligation to get interested in that, so that you can advocate for the community and advocate for flood relief or, whatever the issue is.
You talked about once you got on council, once you became mayor, you had to take a much broader approach, right? You listened to everyone, or you listened to the different constituencies, right? And then you went out and you sought other constituencies and you talked to other people. There are some people that don't necessarily believe that elected officials should talk to everyone. And what do you think about that? And what do you think about that under the guise of statesmanship?
Well, I can talk to anyone without automatically adopting their perspective or or what they're telling me. I use it as informing the whole decision. So, excuse me, just because I talk to one person or another person doesn't mean that I'm leaning this way or that way. It means that this person has a perspective and has either reached out to me and asked me to meet with them, or I think it's an important perspective to inform my decision on the issue. And so I I think it's important to meet with a wide variety of people. And I think that you can do that without being unduly influenced by any one perspective. At least I can, I believe.
I do think it's very interesting that this notion or this sentiment that I don't think it was always there, but I will say in the last maybe I was an elected official for almost 13 years. I would say probably toward the end, the last 3 years, there was this idea that if you talk to somebody that had a different perspective of maybe another group that you also spoke with, that for some reason you couldn't have a conversation without being influenced or without your mind being changed or without something happening. And I often wondered about that because I was like, one, you should be able to have a conversation and get the totality of the information to understand what people think, um, and be able to use that information to make your ultimate decision. But some people are just so adamantly opposed that you should not be talking to certain people and only talk to other people. I'm like, well, how does that work in a democracy where everybody, or at least we say, we want everybody to have a seat at the table, a space in the room, to be able to talk, the whole freedom of speech, to be able to bring up their viewpoints. I mean, how do you make good policy by only talking to a handful of people? Is it possible to make good policy that way?
Um, I don't believe so. I always got, I'm so literal. I'm like, is there any possible circumstance where that could, but as a general rule, I would say no. And I find that also I'm able to try out my arguments with people too, especially if they disagree with me. And so when I give them my perspective and they come back with their perspective, they often give me something different to think about. And I think that that's important. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm adopting someone's perspective or what they want me or counsel to do. I'm very able to talk to a lot of different people and make up my own mind.
Something else that when I ran into this when I was elected, I used to tell people, as an elected official, I represent the people who elected me. I represent the people who did not elect me, weren't even interested in electing me, voted for somebody else completely different. And I also represent people who did not have the ability to vote for me. People who are under the age of 18, people who are undocumented, people who have prison background records and are unable to vote. And all of those voices matter when it comes to public policy and understanding that, at least at that time, there was close to 80,000 people in the community. Um, and so not just the people who showed up to council.
Absolutely. And that's where building relationships with a wide variety of people and seeking out those different voices is really important. And that's not to discount the voices that show up at the meeting, because those people are obviously very interested and motivated enough to come to a meeting and voice their concerns. But as we know, everybody knows, there are a whole bunch of people that and a whole bunch of reasons why they don't come to a council meeting. And it's important to represent them as well. And I think it's important to try to get out into the community and to listen to people who might just assume that they don't have a place in the decision making of the community.
Yeah, that's extremely important. When we talk about just the concept of decision making, and what do you say when you have to make a decision? You've weighed, you've talked to, you've listened, you've read, you've done all that. You know, I remember sometimes we get 1,000-page packet, those types of things. You make this decision, and there's somebody who says, my voice wasn't heard because you voted the wrong way. You didn't decide the way I wanted you to decide. So therefore you did not listen to me, you did not hear me.
Well, of course, that does get said. And all I can do is tell people that I did listen and I carefully considered the positions and hope that over the course of time that I'm able to prove, they might not believe it in that instance, but hopefully I'm given the opportunity to prove that I actually do listen to people who want to share a perspective or information with me. But it's I can remember back when I was advocating for things and didn't get what I had hoped for. It's disappointing, and I get the disappointment, and I'm still listening, and I'm committed to continuing those conversations even when we've had disagreements.
You've brought up the concept, or you've mentioned relationships several times, right, in our conversation. Why is that important?
Well, I think the evolution of a relationship should hopefully build trust, and both ways, right? So as a policy maker, knowing who the trustworthy and that, I guess, knowing someone well enough to know where they're coming from and to understand that perspective in the context of the decision that you have to make. So when you build those relationships, that's how you get to know each other, and that's hopefully how you get to build trust, and how I think that's also how you're able to pull more people into the discussion, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel like they've tried to enter the discussion and haven't been, for whatever reason, didn't feel welcome, didn't feel like they were listened to. So I kind of take the long view of doing this work and building trust and building relationships. That's like the foundation for all of it.
Where does civility come into play? Can you maybe talk about, and I know just watching the news that, the Flagstaff City Council has dealt with some very hard topics as of late, right? And just the concept of civility and what that means to have a conversation with the public, with the people who are there, with the people at this grocery store. One thing, being a local elected official, people are going to stop you where they see you to have the conversation that they want to have. And it seems like over the last couple of years, we've really been having a conversation, maybe nationally, about what does civility look like, and how do people interact, and how do people talk, and why is it that it seems like civility is lost? Do you feel like civility is lost? Do you feel like that is up to the elected officials to set the tone? What do you think about that?
I think a lot of things. I heard a definition of civility. I was watching a group of authors um, at a book festival, and one of the authors gave a definition that was something like, I mean, it's not like being polite or being nice. It was creating the space for people to come into civil society and have those discussions. And I thought, that's my favorite definition of the word, because I've had people scoff and say, oh, civility, like I'm supposed to be polite even when I'm really angry, or I'm supposed to be nice just to be nice. And that's not it at all. It's just being respectful of another human being. And from my vantage point, from my perspective, leaving enough room to have future conversations, right? Because you can take it in a direction where the other person's not going to be so eager to meet and talk to you again, depending on how that conversation went. So I see it as just really creating that space for all people to know that their perspective matters, and that we're going to hear it, and that we're going to give each other the space to say our piece, speak our minds.
Why do you think it seems like nowadays we don't necessarily want to hear what the other person has to say? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that something that you experience?
Yes.
In that, we talk about freedom of speech. We talk a lot about that in our country. And it seems like in some cases, freedom of speech means I can just say whatever I want to say, however I want to say it, and you just have to accept it. But you just mentioned something that I think is really key. You can say whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, and the other person then has the ability to respond to that, which means that they might not want to have another conversation with you, but you might need to have another conversation. I tell my daughter that how you talk to people is important, because especially, first of all, you need to have a relationship prior to the conversation, but especially with difficult topics and difficult things, you kind of know where the line is, right? You have a relationship with somebody, you kind of know where their line is, and you know that if you cross it, that might terminate your relationship, your friendship. I mean, I'm sure people who are married might say your marriage, things like that. So why do you think it is that people don't necessarily want to hear the other side?
I think that for some people, it's, in the dichotomy of, do you want to be effective or do you want to be right?
Mhm.
It comes down to that. And for me, I want to be effective. I want to get stuff done. And that means that I need other people, and I need their perspectives. I need their participation. I need their trust. And for people who aren't, I guess, really going for being effective, they're just going for stating their case, then there's no need to really care how you talk to someone. And of course, we've all talked a lot about social media and what that has done. And we all know that there are people who say things online that would never say it to a person's face. Um, and so I think sometimes maybe we forget that it's a human on the other end, and we can be really angry at someone, and you still don't have to try to tear them down, or treat them as less than human. You can just be angry and come back at the discussion later when you've calmed down and when the other person has calmed down.
It's interesting what you just said, and I'm like, yes, you can either be right or you could be effective, right? And I think that goes to the point that there's usually more than one side. And I hate to even use the word side, right? But there's usually more than one way, more than one set of lens in which to look at an issue. And there's usually many different ways to look at the issue. And so you can be effective in trying to get everybody's viewpoint and coming up with a policy that works, or you could just be right, and stand in your rightness. But doesn't that circle back to the importance of collaboration and compromise?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in most instances it does. And there's a book that I'm really interested in now, and I just listened to a podcast with the same author yesterday, but Adam Grant, who wrote Think Again, and his whole premise is you work off your values, right? My values are what drive me to do what I do. But when you leave room for really listening to someone else's values and ideas and leave room for thinking again, maybe changing your mind, maybe not. I just think that when you have that kind of mindset, it makes it much easier to have difficult conversations with people you disagree with, because you're not coming into that conversation with, I must convince you that I'm right. You're just coming into the conversation to hear what they have to say and maybe give some of your arguments. And I think it feels like lower stakes, maybe, when every conversation isn't about proving that I'm right and you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. So then I have, my last question regarding statesmanship is the concept of empathy, and whether or not you feel that empathy is a trait. Actually, I have two questions for you. Whether or not you feel that empathy is a trait that statesmen have.
Um, yeah, I would hope that every human has it, right? Um, but it definitely drives me, and my thinking on this has really evolved. So it's really interesting to me to even listen to my own self talk when I can think back to how I might have viewed different issues when maybe that activism was more important to me. But now I'm in a different role, and so I have a different job to do. But empathy is really what leads me to do the job that I do, and it's what leads me to be genuinely and sincerely curious about the perspectives of others, and also really working hard to make sure that everyone can leave the conversation with their dignity intact, even if they didn't get what they want, to know that they were respected and heard.
I like those two words that you added to the conversation. The first one is curious about others. I think that for me, one of the key traits that a statesman need to have is a true and genuine curiosity about other people. Because if you're not interested in other people, interested in their feelings, what they think about what they think in general, what they think about life, if you're just not interested in them on that level, then I think it's hard to have empathy. I think it's hard to want to interact with them. And I think it's hard to want to come up with policies that address the overall totality of issues, right? So I like the fact that you said, you're genuinely curious about people, and you're curious to get to know them. The other one is dignity. Can you talk about that a little bit more? The concept of dignity.
Yeah, I think it's important in all community dealings to try to have everyone walk away with dignity and not feel like they were treated as though their ideas didn't matter, or they as a person and their experiences, that those experiences don't matter. I think it's important not to have a zero sum, outlook to community issues. It's important to me that that people know that I have integrity, and I stand, that when I tell them something, that they can trust that I at least believe it and I'm sincere, and that I believe the same of them.
When you use that word, I was just sitting here thinking, I ran for council in 2008 because I felt the community was not being heard, and I felt the way the community was being treated lacked dignity, right? And then I ran for mayor in 2016 because I sat through a meeting and I felt that the community, specifically one individual who came to speak, was not being treated with dignity. And, the space in which people come to talk to their city council is supposed to be the space for everybody. So
Right.
for me, it didn't matter what language you're speaking, your education level, if you came with an organized group of people that have been here forever, or if you just literally got off work and walked in with your kiddo and you want to talk to your city council, like, we represent everybody. And I felt that there was a lack of dignity in the way this person was being treated.
I have witnessed similar things throughout the years. And so I have made it a point, when we have contentious issues at council, and there are more than one perspective represented in the audience, to ask audience members not to clap or boo, just to allow everyone the same space to voice their opinion, whether you agree with it or not. And I think that this council does a good job of also actively listening to people who are speaking to us, and not having big reactions, because I've certainly spoken to council before and had council members have visible reactions
Yeah.
about what I was saying, and it's an uncomfortable thing to, because I was never super comfortable speaking before city council anyway, and so to see people visibly just disagreeing with what I'm saying before I'm even done saying it, I'm just committed to other people not feeling that way when they come to city council to speak, because I sincerely want to hear what everyone has to say. And it doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything that everyone has to say.
Yeah, I can totally remember being on the other side of the podium, and having members of council just kind of saying what they were saying or rolling their eyes or whatnot. But I also remember being that person, and I've seen it a couple times, where I was standing there with one particular opinion, and I was the only person in the room that had that opinion, right? And I look at people who come up knowing that there's literally 400 people in the audience, 399 have been very clear where they stand, and you are the only person with a different opinion or a differing opinion, and how much gumption, quite frankly, it takes for that person to walk up there and state their opinion, regardless of whether or not I agree with it at all, right? The fact of the matter is that I do remember looking at that and saying, hey, I applaud that person for being so dedicated, focused, and willing to walk up in front of everybody and say something that is going to set off 399 people, but you felt it important enough to point out a different perspective on the issue. And you're right, people are cheering, laughing, all this kind of stuff. And so I do think that it's interesting, right? Because at one time or another, I've either been on this side of it, and maybe that's it, right? I've either been the person talking to council, or I've been on some side of one side where everybody was overjoyed, or I've been on the other side where everybody was upset and didn't want to hear it.
Exactly. And I mean, this is one instance where I think the city council has to set the tone for that decorum in city council chambers. And I think it takes courage to come to the city council and speak regardless. And it takes a lot of courage to be in the minority voice during an issue, and speak before city council. And I was hired to to preside over a meeting and create the space for people to say their piece and to listen respectfully.
So we're closing in on our time, Mayor Becky, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you being here. I want to ask two more questions just shortly before we close out. You are a female mayor. You're the third female mayor of the city of Flagstaff, and I wanted to just get your perspective. If you think you think your leadership style, this concept of empathy, concept of relationships, that kind of thing, is that something that is different because you are a female, or is this something that you think all mayors should have or have had moving forward? I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think the best elected people have empathy and really want to hear what the public has to say and work hard to hear different people. Um, I do think that everyone has the capacity to be empathetic and to be an active listener. And I think that we don't always value that skill in political life.
Mm.
And I think that women are sometimes treated differently, and held to a different standard in terms of what people think is effective leadership. And I think sometimes a softer style is seen as weaker or timid. And I just always tell people I'm in the long game, and you can think that I'm weak or that I'm timid, but I'm in it to the end, and you'll see how tenacious I am.
I like that because you said that before, the long game, right? And the totality of the situation and the overall viewpoint. And you're right. Sometimes, we live in a society that wants people to jump forward instantly, make that decision, do what we're going to do, regardless of whether or not it's the right decision or not, right? My mom used to call it the sitcom generation, where we have a very short attention span. You have a 30-minute sitcom, bunch of commercials. So you have 12 minutes, really, that we're going to get your attention span. Now we have things like TikTok and Instagram and all the social media. And so to sit back and not rush to judgment, to say that you want to think about it, that you want to go talk to a couple more people to really get the facts is something that does not necessarily resonate with everybody. But I do believe that is the quality of the statesman, to really want to understand the situation and not make a rash decision, because what the decision that you make is going to impact everyone in the city of Flagstaff, not just, a handful of people. So my last question has to do with, you said that you think that everybody could learn empathy, and learn active listening skills. Do you think statesmanship is a skill that people are born with, or is it something that people can develop and hone over time? Are just people born statesmen, or do they evolve to be statesmen? Can people transcend, not pronouncing that right, but can people go from being an activist to a politician, to this subcategory of politicians that we refer to as statesmen? Do you think that's
I
possible?
Yeah, I don't know that anyone is born any definitive thing. I think probably we all have our propensities to act one way or another. I think that I've made a conscious choice to get better at not reacting before I listen. And it's been work.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of work. So I think that anyone, if they decide that that's a goal for themselves and they're willing to work at it, can do it. I don't think you could be born a statesman, but I do think that you could become one if it was something that you sought to do, if it was a value that you had. And I think that also we need all kinds of people, right? I mean, we talked about the importance of activists. I think that I'm a passionate person, so my calm demeanor doesn't mean I'm not passionate. I just, I'm choosing to try to stay calm and listen, but there's room for everybody and every kind of approach. I've just found this approach to be really effective for me.
Well, Mayor Becky, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Everyone, this is Mayor Becky Daggett with the City of Flagstaff, current mayor of the City of Flagstaff. And I want to make sure that everyone knows why we're having these conversations. Want to make sure that Mayor Becky also knows that I'm going to invite her to come back on the show again to further this conversation. But the idea is that we're talking about leadership at a local level. There's a lot of focus on national leadership and statewide leadership, but not as much leadership or not as much conversation focused on leadership at the local level. And we always talk about mayors and city councils are closest to the people. You're going to see them in the grocery store. You're going to stop and have a conversation. We want to ask about water. We want to ask about trash pickup. We want to ask about things that are closest and dear to our heart. And I feel that the conversation about what makes a good and effective leader comes down to this subset of category of people that we talk about who are statesmen, people who can have conversations with other people, who are leading, who are actively doing things to better the lives of the people that they were elected to serve. And perhaps if we can understand how, I think that if mayors were in all elected officials, we would have all elected positions. We would have a very, very different leadership at the state and at the federal level. I just have to say that because mayors are elected at 50% plus one. They have to talk to everyone, and they have a better understanding of the totality, the concept of compromise, why we have to go talk to other people, how we're going to make sure everybody fits in the room. And so as we move forward and looking at upcoming elections, whether they be local, state, or federal, I'm thinking that these conversations about why empathy is important, about why talking about compromise, about why relationships is important, then that can help us make the best decisions possible as we go forward and vote. So we'll be having more of these conversations. We have a couple of great people scheduled in the next coming weeks. And Mayor Becky, I just appreciate you being on this show today and talking about your viewpoint of statesmanship and how you govern.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a great discussion, and I love these discussions because they make me hone in on my thinking. And we almost
we love our dogs. We love our puppies.
Because it makes me think harder about what my values are and about what kind of leader I want to be.
Well, we appreciate you, and we definitely love our puppies, so that's okay.
Well, thank you, and Lola thanks you too.
We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.